Well, the whole thing where he said they were right. In the other passage it says, or in the other version it says they thought he was a ghost.
Yeah.
So that opens up a whole new thing.
Yeah. So I take it seriously.
I can't drink that. I'm glad I didn't really have a real beer.
This is good.
I'm going to go from 16 to what I thought was 40.
We were. Oh, yeah, that's right. Let's go to 24 and take that.
Oh, 24?
Yeah.
You don't want to go as long?
Well, we will. We'll get into that. Hey, good evening. Sorry for the delay. Darin had to grow his beard out.
Diane said, "Is that a grass skirt on your chin? You're taking the Y thing a bit too far."
You can take it off.
Nope, thank you.
Yeah, we just wanted
I don't know how people have real beards like that. I don't. That's really annoying. I want to get rid of this. I have
gray.
It's not gray. No, I'm thinking about it, especially the summer. In the summer, it's hotter. You know, I could take like 3 degrees off the top of my lip just by
It does get hotter.
shaving. It feels.
Yeah, it does. If you shave.
So, what do you think? Keep it or keep this? Keep this or get rid of it?
Are we really here for fashion tips for Darin?
Well, you're the one that made me put that beard on.
I guess so. I like your shirt, by the way.
Well, thanks. I
Is
thought
that
I'd
the
keep
same
it.
one from last week?
No, last week was red.
Are you sure? We'll have to review the
Pretty
tape.
No, I thought I'd just keep it going. You know, it's hot outside.
It is.
And, got hair in my mouth.
Steve said Willie Robertson got a haircut. Now we know where it went.
Yeah, right.
That's bad.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. I've had that thing on before. We really don't know where that's been. I have no idea. Anyway, we'll put on our dog right before
Let's
we
move on.
Yeah, we're in John chapter 6. Sorry for all that.
We're later than usual.
Yeah.
That didn't help.
No, it didn't. You want to tell them?
Yeah, my son. He's he just finished boot camp in the Navy. Jess is his name, and he FaceTimed me just to 30 minutes.
That was so good.
45 minutes before we started, and so I couldn't not talk to him. So I haven't seen him since mid-March. So, and physically in person anyway. I've FaceTimed him a couple of times, but he's just got settled in Charleston. Well, he will be in school for the next 2 years. So hopefully, I'd like to take a trip out there this summer, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And he had just gotten there. Today's his first full day there, so he was telling me about his room and stuff on the base. So anyway,
it was
good.
It was neat to eat supper while and hear you guys talking in the background.
Oh yeah.
I looked at Lee and I said, "This is just great."
Just eavesdropping on.
Yeah, we were listening.
You don't have clearance, military clearance,
Well,
to hear things we were.
I used to.
Discussing.
No, I don't.
Anyway.
So yeah, so that's why.
Actually, I used to.
What's that?
I said actually I used to, but not that. Probably not high enough clearance.
Yeah, you did use some clearance, but wasn't that a good reason? I mean, I said we had a good reason, so that's it. So we're going to look at John chapter 6. We are in verse 16. We'll read Darin will read the account about Jesus walking on the water, and we'll just go through this, and if you have comments, let us know. Lee's monitoring that. She does a great job, by the way, with all the equipment, and the fades in the song is just so sweet.
Beautiful. It's perfection, really. She should be up for an award.
Okay,
She
guys,
should be.
just move on.
Okay, so verse 24, is that where we're going to stop? Or verse
Well,
30?
let's not talk about where we're going to stop.
Well, I need
Just
to have
stop
an
at
ending
one.
point.
Oh, yes, when you're reading, yes.
34?
I thought you meant for the evening.
No.
Okay.
No, we'll,
Yes. Let's stop in 24.
Okay, perfect. All right. So before this, last week Jesus fed the 5,000. They wanted to make him king, and he got out of there because it wasn't his time. So that's verse 15.
In chapter what now?
In verse chapter 6, verse 15, and then we're going to start in verse 16.
Well, before you start,
Yeah.
interesting thing. This account is it's in all the. This story is in all the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And of course, John has he does things a little different. They all do, but you get a different view of the same event. And so some of them leave certain things out. Some of them put certain things in
Right.
that they noticed or they saw. It's all God driven. I mean, he's the one that's he's this is his word. So, but they're writing from their perspective, what they see.
Right, and from their own individual style.
Yeah.
You know, Paul had a style too,
Right.
and so did Peter, and so
Yeah.
it's not he's not the Spirit is not forcing them into a particular mold, but he's guiding them
Right.
with what to say in their own particular
Yeah.
way.
And John does an interesting job of just presenting Jesus. I love the Gospel of John, and he doesn't really talk much about miracles. He doesn't present too many of them in his writing, but this is something that is, like I said, just recorded the feeding of the 5,000 in all the Gospels. So we're not going to go into what Luke said, what Matthew and Mark said. We're just going to stick with John here, but anyway, just so you know that.
Okay, verse 16. John 6. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea and got into a boat and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. And when they rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." And then they were glad to take him into the boat. Immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. And on the next day, let me read that again. Then they were glad to take him into the boat. And immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going.
We might come back to that.
That may, yeah, we might want to visit that. On the next day, the crowd that remained on the other side of the sea saw that there had been only one boat there, and that Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone away alone. Other boats from Tiberias came near the place where they had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. So when the crowd saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they themselves got into the boats and went to Capernaum seeking Jesus. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" And Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you're seeking me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him God the Father has set his seal." And then they said to him, "What must we do to be doing the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." So they said to him, "Then what sign do you do, that we may see and believe you? What work do you perform?" "Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it's written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat."
I thought you were just on the 24.
I thought you were going to stop me. You said,
Oh, I
okay.
got distracted. I got a phone call, I think, didn't I?
Was that you?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll stop there anyway.
Okay.
Now that we've stopped.
Sorry.
It's all right.
So he sends everybody away, and well, they had intended to make him king. We talked about that last week. So 16 through 24, what do you make of this? I mean, what do you see in here that jumps out at you? I mean, what do you see? What strikes you?
Well,
as,
he let them go off. His disciples went off alone, and he wasn't with them. He went a separate.
Mhm.
They parted ways here.
Mhm.
And we don't really get much about. Well, he went to the mountain.
Yeah.
What he was doing up there, probably praying. That's what he seemed to
That's
to
pretty
enjoy
good.
doing. By himself
Mhm.
up the mountain, and they went and did their thing. I assume they probably went fishing. Night fishing was pretty common, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When they went out, so
I think he sent. I think one of the said we weren't going to get into other gospels, but one of the other gospels says he sent them away. in the
verse
boat.
16, yeah, when
16,
evening
yeah.
came, is they went
Yeah.
out to sea and
Yeah.
did what they do.
So-
That's what they're used to doing. They went to Capernaum, and a storm came up. Right? That's what you
Yeah.
see there in verse 18.
So things are going pretty good, and then a storm comes up. This probably isn't anything new for them,
no,
right?
I'm
This
sure
part isn't.
This was, from what I understand, this was a stormy area. I mean,
Yeah.
the way the terrain is conducive to storms, pretty common. thing.
Yeah, in 19, when they had rode about 3 or 4 miles.
That's,
What's an extra mile if you're going 3 or 4?
Yeah.
You know, that's a long way to row, and of course Mark's gospel says they were in the middle of the lake, so he puts them in the middle
that makes
of
sense.
it. So when you're in the middle of something and going back or going forward, right, which is the best option?
Mm-hmm.
So you that's the way life is, right?
Well, and in the middle of the lake,
Yeah.
with just rowing power,
Mm-hmm.
you're stuck. You don't.
Yeah.
You don't have many options here.
And they see Jesus approaching in the boat. Now, he's walking on the water. Not your typical thing that you see a human being doing.
And of course, in the other accounts,
Mm-hmm.
they thought he was a ghost.
We probably should just do a harmony of the Gospels and be done with it.
Well, we'll do Mark
Yeah.
next.
Okay.
But they thought he was a ghost.
Yeah, they're frightened.
And so they were afraid.
We'd be
obviously.
afraid too,
Of
right?
course. That makes perfect sense when you see someone doing that.
So it's nighttime, right?
It is nighttime.
It's dark. So how did they see him?
Well, they probably didn't see him until he was getting pretty close.
But even then, how would they? I mean, I'm thinking the storm. Maybe there's
Storm?
some lightning. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be scary.
So through some flashes of lightning, possibly. They, it lights it up, and you see someone. And wait a minute, did you?
And these are not
Yeah.
novice guys to the sea.
So-
they know what this is all about. And,
For them to think it's a ghost. I mean, this is not your typical situation.
Right.
Obviously, they've seen something here that's pretty amazing, and so they're frightened. Verse 20. But he said to them, Jesus did, "It is I. Don't be afraid."
Mhm.
And of course, the other gospels get into a little bit more
Right.
of what took place here. You're getting a little different view, but John's pretty just sort of straight down the middle of the road here on this, and then they were willing to take him into the boat.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you see somebody.
Well,
And are you willing to take? I mean, even if you see somebody walk alongside the road today, all right, you're driving along and you see somebody, maybe somebody's hitchhiking. People still do that, and the debate in your mind is, do I pick them up or do I not pick them up? And typically, people don't pick them up. But if you've ever been in that situation, then maybe you would pick somebody up. So, But I like how it says they were willing. When Jesus says, "It's me," then they were willing to take him into the boat.
Well,
But
yeah.
they weren't just going to take an ordinary ghost.
But this is
Walking on the water
This is not a
into the
normal
boat.
situation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Steve says, wouldn't expect to see a pedestrian in the middle of the sea, in
No,
the middle of
you
a storm.
You wouldn't,
Right.
would you? So,
Um,
I mean,
Jesus probably didn't have his thumb out,
if Je-
trying to hit you right.
had Jesus not said anything, they wouldn't have probably yelled out, "Hey, get in the boat!
Exactly.
He's walking on the water. It's not like he's swimming.
Mhm.
He's walking on top of the water."
And that's a long walk, 3 or 4 miles. It would have taken him a while to get out there.
Well, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm
So
assuming.
the next verse, verse 21.
Yes. Yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead. You go ahead and explain.
And-
the next,
okay.
this next part.
Then immediately, the boat reached the shore where they were headed. Immediately. Well, what does that word mean?
Is that what your version says immediately also?
what does yours
Okay.
say?
Immediately as well.
Mhm.
Instantly, at once. Is the,
And some people would think that, well, here's another miracle. Boom, they're just right there. I mean, it's all of a sudden like a speedboat,
Mhm.
or they just skip through time or something, and they're, sort of like when Philip was
right.
done with
that's where my
talking with
mind
the
went. Yes.
Ethiopian,
He was caught
and all of
away,
a sudden, boom, he's somewhere else.
Mhm.
So, I mean, God's capable of doing that. He created time, so he transcends all of that. But the boat was
Well, let me ask you
it's
this.
safe arrival. When they got there, though, that's the good thing is that this is a storm. Who knows what was going to happen? They're out in the middle of the lake, no doubt, and Jesus is concerned about them enough that he. It says it grew rough. I mean, it was
Mhm.
that. So this was a doozy of a storm, and Jesus is concerned, so he walks down there, and whether it's a miracle, whether they just all of a sudden were there or not, the point is that Jesus is the one that took care of them
Mhm.
in that situation. He got them where they needed to go, which is a good point for us. I mean, he will get us safely where we need to go. I mean, and boy, you talk about spiritualizing a text. You could really do it here. You could say things like, well, if we believe in
When we're in
Jesus,
the
we
storm.
take him into our life, then he will guide us through and get us through. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily what's intended here, but I do know that Jesus was with them.
Mhm.
That made all the difference in the world. And they take him in the boat. They got across the rest of the lake in that rough storm, and they got across the lake.
Well, and I didn't know. I was going to ask you if you know of any details in the language that would that maybe
On this
immediately with that
Well-
word immediately that was a figure of speech, not necessarily a literal immediately, but either way, it could have been immediately, and my opinion, it was an instant. He got there across the lake, out of that storm, out of that situation, back on back to the land where they were intended to go.
And whether it was or not, that's really neither here nor there. But if I tend to think it is something that was miraculous, and they I don't know what kind of ride it was, but it was I'm sure they'd never had one like that. If that's that'll be something we can ask
Sure,
when we're in heaven,
that's
right?
good. That's a
Hey,
good
I
one.
want to know about this immediately.
tell me
thing.
Won't that be amazing to talk to him about all of the stories and the things that we
Wow.
read about here? Can
Yeah.
you tell me more about feeding the 5,000?
And we probably won't even have to ask those things.
I expect to spend eternity learning all of the things that and never fully knowing all of it.
Well, we'll have some knowledge that we definitely don't have here. That's for sure.
Right.
Some understanding.
That'll be pretty cool.
It will be.
Tell me about that.
Yeah.
How did that all happen? Yeah.
So then the crowd.
The crowd.
We switched from the disciples and sort of in distress.
And this crowd, they noticed that something wasn't quite right here about the whole situation, because they were on the one side. They didn't see him get into a boat. They only saw one boat go out, so they knew he didn't take a boat. So they're like, well, how did he get over there? How? And so, there's questions that are coming up here. That's verse 23 and 24. But they ask him, how did you get, when did you come here? How did, when did all this happen? Because we didn't see you get in a boat, and we know you didn't get in with them. So what's going on here? And then Jesus takes the opportunity to teach and not just answer the question, but to teach a lesson here.
I love the fact that he just, you might say he kind of calls him out on this, but
I was going to ask, how is he getting on to them, or is he just stating a fact, or is it one of those things where the tone of voice that you read this in determines your perception of Jesus?
Well, it says very, very truly, I tell you, and anytime Jesus says that, you better listen up. I mean, he has something to say. He's telling you the truth, and this is something that they would have all recognized that. Yeah, I mean, we could say it was something different. Now, sometimes we want to do that. If
that's not what he meant.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. Well, that's not. No, that's not really why we did this and we came out here. But he just says, verse 26, I tell you the truth. You're looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill.
Is it possible, let me ask you this is something I was thinking about. Is it possible that, there were several thousand people there? Is it possible that they didn't really know where the food came from? All they knew was they're listening to him teach, they're hungry, and here comes food. They don't really know it was him and where, that it started with
5,000 people in a group.
With the small amount of food, that he's the one that did the miracle. That's kind of my perception here, and he's not that he's getting on to them, but this is just
he's just telling the truth.
This is just the truth. You're seeking a sign. We know that's the way they are, because they do. They
figured out it was him because they all start hot footing it around the lake, and they get over there and they understand.
But they ask him again, what kind of sign are you going to do?
And this is good, because what we get into here is not competition, but they start talking about Jesus. No, they talk about the manna first in verse 30 and 31, right? 31. Yeah, 31. Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Now, so Jesus calls it what it is. You guys are here not because of what I did, or the sign that I did, the miracle that I did, but you're here because you ate all you wanted. And so I have the sort of the idea, at least here, and you may, chime in on this too, those of you out there that are taking part in this. I think that they were wanting this to continue. So I have a couple, I don't know, I took some notes here, but one of the things that they're asking for a greater sign than the one that the one of manna, that that would have accompanied Moses. I mean, this is what Moses did and all that. So it really, they wanted Jesus to do what God did for their ancestors, and it was a continual feeding. I mean, so Jesus says, you're here because you ate your fill, and you want, I mean, basically they want more. If Jesus is going to provide everything you can eat whenever you need to eat, why not go with him?
Yeah.
And why not just hang around him? So I have no doubt this group is interested in what he can give them. But Jesus has more in mind, obviously.
Right. Yes.
So that manna, if you think about the manna in the wilderness, we're talking about the Exodus, and then the promised land, the land spied out. They don't believe, and so because of their unbelief, they're wandering around in the wilderness.
Right.
God's feeding them, taking care of them. He loves them, but also they're not gonna. You're not gonna. You don't believe me? I mean, and so God's not really happy with this group.
Right.
I mean, he was with few of them that said we can do this.
A couple of them.
Yeah. So the manna was a result of unbelief. Really, you could say that. I mean, it's a result of God. It's a result of God's love, but also it's a result of.
Well, it wouldn't have been necessary if
right.
they had been.
It's unnecessary if they believe.
Right.
Right. So they were fed until, really, I mean, till they didn't need to be fed anymore. But God says, and we won't read this, but Numbers 14:29 and Numbers 32:13 talks about God. Basically, that group was going to die off, and God they were not going to enter because of their unbelief. So
it's not something to be proud of.
No.
They're saying
No.
here, God fed us, but you should, Jesus kind of, you shouldn't be happy about that. That's not something to boast about. Your ancestors, rejecting or not believing God, and so He had to take care of them.
Then they're not thinking of it like that.
No,
they're just
no,
thinking,
of course not.
this is food.
Exactly.
Come on, feed us. But so, when Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, you're here not because of the sign, but you're here because of the bread." Maybe you see it as getting onto them, maybe not. But he says the work of God is this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what must we do to do the works God requires? It's a question for today as well. People ask that all the time. Well, what does God want me to do? Well, Jesus says the work of God is this: to believe in the one He has sent. So believe in Jesus, and that's what this is all about. So they ask him, "What sign then will you give?" So what they're wanting to know is, are you going to do something? They're asking for a sign that's greater than the one of manna that Moses. It was associated with Moses' ministry, you might say. So I found this out in studying a little bit for this, that it was a popular expectation among the Jews that when the Messiah would come, that he would sort of renew the sending of manna to the people. So this is something that they, maybe were expecting. So wow, this is pretty good. But what sign? What are you going to show us? I mean, so you get Jesus. Maybe in their minds they're thinking this, and so this is maybe what's driving this question. I don't know. But Jesus feeds the 5,000, right? Well, Moses fed a nation. Is what they would think. Jesus did it once, and Moses did this
40 years.
Over and over again for 40 years. So Jesus gives ordinary bread. It was barley. It's what they could find. It was the common cheap bread of the day, and it was known as the bread of the poor. Moses gave them bread from heaven. So what, Jesus' correction on this for them is that the manna didn't come from Moses.
Right.
It came from God.
Right.
And that the bread from heaven, the bread that comes down from heaven, is me.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to get into a very graphic
Mm-hmm.
description of this. He's going to talk about eating his own flesh and drinking his own blood. And some of them are going to jump ship. I mean, they're out of here when he hears them talking. They hear him talking about that. But this bread that came down from heaven, it's repeated at least 6 times here. 38, verse 38, verse 41, 50, 51, and 58. It's repeated over and over again for a reason. Because they're wanting to know.
Well,
what are you going to do?
And what is bread then? What is that? What does that symbol, mean? And for them to remember, bread is what kept them alive for 40 years. Now Jesus is saying, listen, now I'm going to give you bread that will keep you alive forever. Not physically, but spiritually.
Look at, and that's a great point. When you think about what Jesus says in 32, he said to them, very truly I tell you, again, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from him.
Present
so
tense.
yes,
Past tense,
this
present
is
tense,
important. He's letting them know that this is happening right now. And he goes on to say, for the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Well,
not to the
nation.
Not to a nation.
This is different. This is bigger. It's a bigger scope. It's John 3:16 and 17, right? So we see him saying, they said, sir, always, I told Lee that I love this statement. Always give us this bread. Just always give us this one, what you're talking about. Go ahead, Lee.
Steve says their problem was the same as the Sinai Israelites. Moses and Joshua sent from God, and they didn't believe them. Now the Son, and still not believing.
Yeah.
Your job is to believe.
Right. So, if we get anything out of tonight's study, it's we need to believe what God is doing through Jesus, what he has done, what he is doing. So it would be good for all of us to take a fresh look at Jesus, because it's easy for us to think in ways that we've always thought. And I'm not saying that's wrong.
Well,
that's bad.
If we said this about Jesus, what they said about the bread, give us Jesus always.
Yeah.
That changes everything.
Oh, it does, doesn't it?
And so
that's good.
it makes that statement even more important. They were wanting to be fed physically. They wanted to, obviously that. Of course you want to be fed. This food was hard to come by and free.
Yeah.
Free food. All they had to do was show up.
I love it. I'm all in.
Who doesn't enjoy that?
Right.
Crash weddings or whatever. Just
family
free
reunions,
free food. Yeah. What's wrong with that? Yeah, family reunions.
What's the potato salad though? You should make a T-shirt. Always give us Jesus.
Always give us this bread.
No. You're ruining it.
What?
Okay. Verse. Let's finish up here because we're
ruining the Bible.
No, not that. The T-shirt. Verse 35. Take a look at verse 35. We'll shut it down here after we look at this. Then Jesus declared. So he just tells them plainly, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. He's got you covered. Hungering and thirsting after.
Isn't that Matthew 5?
Yeah. So.
Beatitudes.
Yes. But, as I told you, you have seen me, and still do not believe. So, maybe we ought to stop there, do you think? No, we didn't make it very far, but we made it.
Yeah, we did all right.
Wanted to get to that statement at least. He's letting them know, listen, I'm the bread of life. I'm what you need. I know you're hungry, and that'll all be taken care of. God knows that we need to eat. He knows those things.
But still, even the apostles won't get this until much, much,
Right.
much later. He's not
Yeah.
talking about their physical well-being.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I assume, given the way they react and the way they have responded to him before, that they're still thinking he's talking about physical, having physical bread and physical drink. It just sounds like a pretty good offer.
That sounds like a great offer.
And it's not even until later on that they get an even better offer. And they, some of them understand, some of them don't. Some people understand that now, some people don't. But he's not as concerned about our physical well-being as he is our spiritual well-being, and we get those two things mixed up sometimes.
Right. Verse 33 is really maybe the key to all this. That for the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And he says, I'm that bread. So he's going to give life to the world. This is really what our world needs. I mean, you look around and you don't have to look far. And I mean, Jesus brings order to chaos. He really does. And that's really what we need. So let us encourage you to hang on to Jesus. Don't give up.
I think that this bread that he's talking about here, verse 33, is gluten-free. So we don't even have to worry about
We don't.
about any of that.
No, we don't have to worry about any of that stuff.
I couldn't
This
resist.
is almost equal to that comment you made last week.
Well, I like to leave
You like
things on it.
On a happy note.
Well, I wouldn't say funny, because I don't even know if it's funny.
I'm not
It's funny
sure.
to me,
Well,
but my sense of humor is kind of weird.
well,
Gluten-free bread from heaven.
well. Yes. So next.
Well, what I was thinking about, people have been eating bread for thousands of years. I mean, this is he could have chosen any food symbol that they were aware of, but bread is the one he targets.
Mhm.
And just how important that was to them.
And who knew that? Right. And who knew that? I mean, no one really connected the dots. Most likely that way back in the desert, when they were done with Egypt. Well, we'd really like to go back there, maybe. But God fed them bread from heaven, and that was going to actually bring everyone to the table so that they could understand, listen, I took care of you then in a physical way. I'm going to take care of you. And Jesus takes care of them in a physical way here. He feeds them. And then they, oh yeah, we want more. And he says, you're here because you ate. But what God is trying to do is help them spiritually. And listen, we always go, it seems like we go for the physical first and then the spiritual, but
He couldn't have taught this lesson if he hadn't fed them.
well, right.
So
Right.
it's not that they did anything wrong here.
They ate because they were hungry.
Exactly.
And he fed them.
He
because
knew they were hungry.
Right.
Yes. He knew that before they did.
Yeah.
And so they didn't do anything wrong by wanting to take care of their physical well-being. He's just trying to say, listen, that's not all there is. If bread is, physical bread is all that life is about, then you miss the point.
Right.
I'm giving you something much better.
Well, and this is sort of like the woman at the well with the water, you know.
Water
Yeah,
and bread.
So she's, you know, she's saying, "Hey, I want this water you're talking about." So he is that. He is the, and he mentions it here, the bread and the water. You won't hunger, you won't thirst. So we just want to encourage everybody to be on board with what God's doing through Jesus and take a good look at Jesus Christ, because he came to give life to the whole world. That's what he says there in verse 33. So
Good.
You want to pray for us? And
Sure.
do you have anything else?
Well, I was going to say, I don't remember. Let's pray.
Does anybody have any
Nope, we're at the end.
comments or thoughts? Okay.
Oh, I remember those.
Okay.
We know what it's like to be hungry. We know how it feels, and what it feels like to be thirsty. And Jesus is saying, I can take that discomfort, not the physical discomfort, but there's a longing. And I think a lot of people have it. You can see, I think people now, they need something. There's something missing. They're hungering, and it hurts them. You know, they feel this kind of pain. And Jesus, I have that. I have what will satisfy that
Yeah, this,
urge.
well, like we were talking about earlier, the hunger and thirsting after righteousness. Well, what is that? Well, just in a sort of an elementary way, it's being right with God. And if you're right with God, you know what? That's the best thing.
Well, we all want, I think every single person wants righteousness, both in their lives. They want people to do the right thing, and they want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Maybe not always, but they certainly would expect it from other people. Treating people fairly,
Right.
and justly. You know, this is a big thing, and people are wanting that. They're desperate for justice, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. God is a just God.
That's a godly thing to desire.
absolutely.
And so Jesus is saying, I can take care of these emotional and spiritual needs that you have. You just gotta believe in God. That's what he says.
Yeah.
That's the work you gotta do.
Yeah, we believe that in the one he sent. You believe in Jesus, and you know, obviously the belief is not just, I believe there's a Jesus. You're all in. So we're going to put, yes.
We didn't get one last comment.
One last comment.
Steve says, this is why in the New Testament there isn't a promise of physical prosperity with service to God, because we would always want more. Only the spiritual bread satisfied, which goes along with what Darin's saying.
True.
That's right.
Good comment.
Okay, I'm done.
All right.
For real.
I am too.
All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for this time we've spent together. And this week, just help us believe in Jesus just a little more. Help us see him as someone who can give us what we need, not necessarily physically, although we believe that you'll take care of us, but we know that Jesus wants more for us. He wants more for our lives, and he wants to save us. Father, let us let him save us. Keep us from the evil one this week, Father. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for joining us.